the silent assassin, decoding the hypertension protocols. It stalks through the vascular system unseen, a phantom force slowly eroding the delicate architecture of the heart and brain. Hypertension is not merely a medical condition, it is a physiological siege that claims millions of lives annually without a whisper of warning. Yet, this biological ticking time bomb can be dismantled through precision and discipline. We have analyzed the clinical data to uncover the definitive strategies for fortifying your arterial defenses against this invisible threat. The investigation begins with the most pervasive dietary culprit hidden in plain sight.
The sodium paradox, dismantling the crystalline threat. To understand the catastrophic impact of sodium on human physiology, one must first appreciate the evolutionary irony that defines our relationship with this mineral. For the vast majority of human history, sodium chloride was a scarce, precious commodity, a vital electrolyte necessary for nerve transmission and muscle contraction, yet so rare that wars were fought over access to salt flats, and Roman soldiers were partially compensated in salarium, the etymological root of the modern salary. Our biology evolved in a low-sodium environment, developing highly efficient mechanisms within the kidneys to hoard every granule of salt to maintain the delicate electrolytic balance required for life. The modern hypertension epidemic is, at its core, a tragic mismatch between this ancient hoarding biology and a contemporary environment of infinite cheap abundance. When we ingest sodium in the quantities typical of the modern Western diet, often exceeding 3,400 to 5,000 milligrams daily, we are essentially poisoning a system designed to operate on a fraction of that amount. The physiological cascade that follows is a masterclass in hydraulic failure. The mechanism by which sodium elevates blood pressure is a study in osmosis and volume overload. When excess sodium enters the bloodstream, the body's homeostatic imperative demands dilution to maintain a stable concentration of serum sodium. To achieve this, the body aggressively retains water, pulling fluid from the intracellular spaces into the intravascular system. This results in a significant increase in total blood volume. Imagine a garden hose designed to handle a specific water pressure. If you suddenly increase the volume of water flowing through it without widening the hose, the pressure against the wall skyrockets. In the human body, this increased volume forces the heart to work harder, pumping with greater force to circulate the heavy, fluid-loaded blood. Over time, this mechanical stress causes microtears in the endothelial lining of the arteries. These microscopic injuries become sites for plaque accumulation, a biological patch job that unfortunately narrows the arteries further, creating a vicious cycle of increasing pressure and hardening vessel walls, known as arteriosclerosis. However, the damage extends far beyond simple fluid dynamics.
Emerging research in the pathophysiology of salt-induced hypertension reveals a more insidious chemical warfare occurring at the cellular level. High sodium intake has been shown to impair the endothelium's ability to produce nitric oxide, a critical molecule responsible for signaling blood vessels to relax and widen. Without sufficient nitric oxide, the arteries remain in a state of chronic constriction, a condition known as vasoconstriction. Furthermore, excessive sodium creates a state of oxidative stress, generating free radicals that further degrade the vascular architecture. The kidneys, the body's primary filtration units, bear the brunt of this assault. In an attempt to excrete the excess sodium, the delicate nephrons within the kidneys are subjected to high-pressure filtration that eventually causes scarring and loss of function. As kidney function declines, the body's ability to regulate blood pressure deteriorates, locking the patient into a spiraling feedback loop of renal hypertension that is notoriously difficult to treat pharmacologically. The investigative lens must also focus on the source of this white death. It is a common misconception that the salt shaker on the dining table is the primary antagonist. In reality, approximately 75% of dietary sodium comes from processed and restaurant foods, where it is used not just for flavor, but as a preservative, a texture enhancer, and a masking agent for cheaper ingredients. This is the industrialization of hypertension. Major food conglomerates have engineered the bliss point, the precise level of salt, sugar, and fat that maximizes palatability and overrides the brain's satiety signals. Sodium is injected into poultry to increase water weight and profit margins. It is hidden in breads, cereals, and sweet pastries to enhance the structural integrity of gluten. It is ubiquitous in sauces and dressings. The consumer is often fighting a losing battle against biochemistry, consuming thousands of milligrams of sodium without ever tasting saltiness. This invisible loading makes the recommendation to limit intake to under 2,300 milligrams, and ideally 1,500 milligrams for high-risk individuals, a logistical nightmare requiring a radical restructuring of one's lifestyle. The cultural and psychological shift required to adhere to a low-sodium protocol is profound. Human taste buds are highly adaptable, exhibiting neuroplasticity. When one habitually consumes high-sodium foods,
the receptors become desensitized, requiring ever-increasing amounts of salt to register flavor. This is why low-sodium food often tastes bland to the uninitiated. The sensory apparatus has been blunted by years of bombardment. However, clinical studies have consistently demonstrated that after a few weeks of strict sodium restriction, these receptors reset. The palate becomes more sensitive, suddenly able to detect the subtle, natural salinity inherent in vegetables and meats. This physiological reset is the cornerstone of successful dietary management.
It requires a transition from passive consumption of industrial products to active engagement with raw ingredients, cooking from scratch, utilizing herbs and spices for flavor complexity rather than relying on the crutch of salt, and meticulously auditing nutritional labels. The global implications of sodium reduction are staggering. Meta-analyses of diverse populations, from the secluded Yanomami tribe of the Amazon, who consume almost no salt and maintain the blood pressure of adolescents well into old age, to the industrialized urban centers of Japan and the United States, confirm a linear relationship between sodium intake and cardiovascular mortality. Public health initiatives in countries like the UK, which mandated gradual salt reduction in processed foods, saw a corresponding drop in stroke and heart attack rates, proving that this is a modifiable risk factor of the highest order. The directive is clear. To lower blood pressure, one must starve the mechanism that sustains it. Reducing sodium is not merely a dietary adjustment, it is a strategic withdrawal from the toxic environment of modern food processing, a reclaiming of physiological autonomy that allows the kidneys to heal, the blood volume to normalize, and the arterial walls to recover their elasticity. It is the first, most critical line of defense in the war against hypertension.
2. The kinetic cure, revitalizing vascular elasticity. If sodium reduction is the act of removing the poison, regular physical activity is the administration of the antidote. In the realm of cardiovascular health, sedentarism is akin to a slow-acting toxin, a state of biological stagnation that invites decay. The human body was engineered for movement. Our ancestors were persistent hunters, designed to cover vast distances on the savanna, their cardiovascular systems tuned by the constant demand for oxygen and fuel transport. The modern era, characterized by the ubiquity of the chair, the car, and the screen, has created a mismatch disease where our genetic programming clashes with our environment. Physical activity acts as a potent physiological regulator, a systemic intervention that does far more than burn calories. It fundamentally alters the hemodynamics of the body, serving as a natural beta blocker and vasodilator that can rival the efficacy of pharmaceutical agents when applied with consistency and intensity. The immediate mechanism by which exercise lowers blood pressure involves the complex interplay of shear stress and endothelial function. When we engage in moderate aerobic activity, such as brisk walking, swimming, or cycling, the heart rate increases, pumping blood through the arteries at a higher velocity. This increased flow creates friction, or shear stress, against the inner lining of the blood vessels, the endothelium. While stress usually connotes damage, in this context it is a vital stimulus. The endothelium responds to this shear stress by releasing a powerful gas called nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is the holy grail of vascular health. It signals the smooth muscle cells in the arterial walls to relax, causing the vessel to dilate. This vasodilation reduces systemic vascular resistance, the resistance the heart must overcome to push blood through the circulatory system. Effectively, exercise widens the pipes, allowing blood to flow more freely and lowering the pressure within the system. This effect, known as post-exercise hypotension, can persist for nearly 24 hours after a single session, meaning that daily exercise effectively keeps the arteries in a dilated, relaxed state around the clock. Beyond the acute effects, chronic physical activity induces structural remodeling of the cardiovascular system. The heart, being a muscle, undergoes hypertrophy in response to training, but unlike the pathological thickening seen in untreated hypertension, this is athlete's heart, a beneficial adaptation. The chambers of the heart become more efficient, able to pump a greater volume of blood with each beat, stroke volume. As stroke volume increases, the resting heart rate decreases because the heart doesn't need to beat as often to supply the body's needs. This reduction in heart rate reduces the mechanical load on the arterial walls over the patient's lifetime. Furthermore, regular activity stimulates angiogenesis, the growth of new capillaries in muscle tissue. This increases the total cross-sectional area of the vascular bed, providing more routes for blood to flow and further reducing peripheral resistance. It is a comprehensive renovation of the body's plumbing system, increasing capacity and reducing strain simultaneously. The type of activity prescribed is a matter of nuance and personalization, moving beyond the generic advice to exercise more. While aerobic exercise remains the gold standard, recent investigations have highlighted the surprising efficacy of isometric resistance training, exercises like wall sits or planks where muscles contract without movement. These static contractions momentarily compress blood vessels, causing a temporary spike in pressure, but trigger a massive rebound effect of vasodilation once the hold is released. This training modality has shown profound results in lowering resting systolic pressure, offering a viable option for those with limited mobility. However, for general management, the consensus centers on 150 minutes of moderate intensity activity per week. This does not necessitate high-performance athletics. Moderate intensity is defined by the talk test, exertion where one can speak but not sing. Walking specifically is often underestimated. It is a low-impact, sustainable activity that acts as a second heart. As the leg muscles contract during a walk, they compress the deep veins, forcing blood back up to the heart and relieving venous pressure. We must also consider the neurohormonal impact of exercise. Hypertension is often driven by an overactive sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight response that floods the body with cortisol and adrenaline, hormones that tighten blood vessels and ramp up the heart. Chronic stress keeps this system in overdrive.
Physical activity burns off these stress hormones and stimulates the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest mode. It increases the production of endorphins and dopamine, neurochemicals that promote relaxation and well-being. By recalibrating the autonomic nervous system, exercise attacks the root cause of neurogenic hypertension. It quiets the biological noise, allowing the vessel walls to relax, not just mechanically, but neurologically. This psychosomatic connection is critical. In a high-stress society, exercise is the release valve that prevents psychological pressure from manifesting as physical pressure. The barriers to implementing this protocol are largely environmental and behavioral. We live in an engineered environment that discourages movement, from drive-through banking to elevators and motorized transport. Overcoming this requires a conscious rejection of convenience. It involves seeing movement not as a chore to be endured in a gym, but as a vital nutrient required by the cells. The integration of activity into daily life, taking stairs, walking during meetings, cycling to work, is essential for long-term adherence. The data is unequivocal. Sedentary individuals who begin a program of regular physical activity can expect to see systolic blood pressure reductions of 5 to 8 millimeters mercury, a magnitude similar to monotherapy with an antihypertensive drug. But unlike drugs, which come with side effects and costs, the side effects of exercise include weight loss, improved insulin sensitivity, better mental health, and increased longevity. In the final analysis, the prescription of physical activity is a call to return to our biological origins. The sedentary body is a stagnant pool, prone to accumulation and toxicity. The active body is a flowing river, self-cleaning and dynamic. By engaging in regular physical activity, we are manually operating the pumps and filters of our own physiology, ensuring that the vascular pathways remain open and elastic. It is a discipline that demands time and effort, but the return on investment is the preservation of the body's most vital infrastructure. In the fight against the silent killer of hypertension, movement is life.
3. The gravitational burden, decoding the metabolic siege of obesity. To comprehend the relationship between body weight and hypertension, one must first dismantle the antiquated notion that adipose tissue, body fat, is merely an inert storage depot for excess energy. For decades, medicine treated fat as a passive backpack of calories that the body carried around, a burden primarily of physics and aesthetics. While the physics of carrying excess mass certainly plays a role, the modern investigative reality is far more terrifying and complex. Adipose tissue, particularly the visceral fat that accumulates deep within the abdominal cavity, is a highly active endocrine organ. It is a biological factory that operates 24 hours a day, manufacturing a toxic slurry of hormones, inflammatory cytokines, and signaling molecules that wage a biochemical insurgency against the cardiovascular system. The correlation between obesity and hypertension is not accidental. It is a direct mechanistic causality rooted in the fundamental laws of hemodynamics and the intricate signaling pathways of the human body. When we discuss maintaining a healthy weight as a strategy for blood pressure control, we are not talking about vanity. We are talking about de-escalating a metabolic war. The first front of this war is purely mechanical, a matter of plumbing and resistance. The human circulatory system is a closed loop, a pressurized circuit designed to perfuse tissues with oxygenated blood. As body mass increases, the biological demand for oxygen rises. To service this expanding territory of tissue, the body must engage in angiogenesis, the creation of new blood vessels. It is estimated that for every pound of excess fat, the body creates miles of new microscopic capillaries. This massive expansion of the vascular network drastically increases the surface area through which blood must be pumped. In fluid dynamics, this concept is known as peripheral resistance. The heart, the system's central pump, must generate significantly more force to push the fluid through this extended, sprawling network of pipes. This increased force manifests as elevated systolic pressure. The heart muscle, forced to contract against this higher resistance millions of times a year, begins to thicken and stiffen, a condition known as left ventricular hypertrophy. This structural change reduces the heart's elasticity, creating a feedback loop where higher pressure begets stiffer arteries,
which in turn requires even higher pressure to maintain flow. However, the mechanical load is merely the tip of the iceberg. The true devastation occurs at the molecular level, orchestrated by the visceral fat cells themselves. These cells are biologically aggressive. They secrete high levels of angiotensinogen, a precursor protein that the body converts into angiotensin II. Angiotensin II is one of the most potent vasoconstrictors known to human physiology. It clamps down on arteries, tightening them like a vice. In a healthy individual, this system regulates blood pressure during times of dehydration or blood loss. In an obese individual, the excess fat tissue floods the system with this chemical, keeping the arteries in a state of chronic pathological constriction. Furthermore, visceral fat pumps out inflammatory cytokines such as interleukin-6 and tumor necrosis factor alpha. These inflammatory markers travel through the bloodstream, damaging the delicate endothelial lining of the blood vessels.
This chronic low-grade inflammation prevents the vessels from relaxing and encourages the formation of atherosclerotic plaque, hardening the arteries and permanently locking in high blood pressure. We must also investigate the profound connection between weight and the sympathetic nervous system. Obesity is often accompanied by a condition known as hyperinsulinemia, chronically high levels of insulin circulating in the blood due to insulin resistance. Insulin is a powerful hormone that does more than regulate blood sugar. It acts on the kidneys to increase sodium reabsorption. High insulin levels signal the kidneys to hold on to salt, which in turn holds on to water, increasing blood volume and pressure. Simultaneously, high insulin levels stimulate the sympathetic nervous system, the body's fight or flight mechanism. This means that an overweight individual is often living in a state of heightened autonomic arousal, with elevated heart rates and constricted vessels, even while sleeping. The body is essentially redlining its engine while parked, driven by a metabolic signal that perceives the excess energy storage as a state of physiological emergency. The sleep connection warrants a specific deep dive analysis within the context of weight. A significant percentage of hypertension cases in overweight individuals are driven by obstructive sleep apnea. This is a mechanical failure where the weight of the neck and chest collapses the airway during sleep, suffocating the patient hundreds of times per night. Each time the airway closes, oxygen levels plummet, triggering a primal panic response in the brain. The brain jolts the heart into action to survive the suffocation, causing massive spikes in blood pressure and flooding the system with adrenaline and cortisol. These nocturnal surges do not dissipate when the sun rises. They reset the body's baroreceptors, the internal pressure gauges, to a higher baseline. The tragedy of this mechanism is its stealth. Many patients are unaware they stop breathing at night, knowing only that their blood pressure remains stubbornly high despite medication. Weight loss is the most effective cure for this specific pathology, as reducing the mass around the neck physically unblocks the airway, allowing the nocturnal hemodynamic storm to subside. The cultural and historical context of our weight crisis reveals a collision between ancient genetics and modern environment. Humans evolved the thrifty gene, a survival mechanism that excelled at storing fat to survive long periods of famine. For 200,000 years, calorie density was rare and physical exertion was mandatory. In the last century, a blink of an eye in evolutionary time, we inverted this reality. We engineered an environment of infinite, effortless calories and zero required movement. The result is that our survival mechanisms are now killing us. The healthy weight metric, often quantified by body mass index, BMI, is a crude but necessary tool in this landscape. While BMI has its detractors, it cannot distinguish between muscle and fat. For the vast majority of the population, a BMI over 30 correlates strongly with the hypertensive cascade described above. More precise metrics, such as the waist-to-hip ratio, offer even starker warnings. Abdominal obesity, the apple shape, is the clearest visual indicator of the visceral fat bomb ticking around the organs. The implications of weight loss on hypertension are fortunately as dramatic as the damage caused by weight gain. Clinical data suggests that losing as little as 5 to 10% of body weight can result in clinically significant drops in blood pressure. This reduction is often nonlinear. The pressure drop often exceeds what one would expect from the weight loss alone.
This is because shedding visceral fat deactivates the chemical factories driving the inflammation and vasoconstriction. As the fat cells shrink, the production of angiotensinogen drops, the insulin sensitivity improves, the kidneys begin to excrete excess sodium, and the sympathetic nervous system cools down. It is a systemic de-escalation. The arteries, no longer under siege from inflammatory cytokines, begin to regain some elasticity. The heart, relieved of the burden of pumping through miles of excess capillaries, begins to remodel and recover. Achieving this, however, is the great challenge of the 21st century. It requires navigating an obesogenic environment designed to keep us heavy. It demands a psychological and behavioral overhaul that goes beyond dieting and moves toward a fundamental restructuring of one's relationship with energy. It involves understanding the hormonal drivers of hunger, the addiction pathways of processed food, and the necessity of metabolic flexibility. The Healthy Weight Directive is not about reaching a magazine cover ideal. It is about reaching a metabolic safe zone where the body's homeostatic mechanisms can function without the interference of adipose toxicity. In the grand investigation of hypertension prevention, weight management is the master key that unlocks multiple pathways of recovery: mechanical, hormonal, and neurological. Without addressing the mass equation, other treatments are often merely palliative, fighting a losing battle against the overwhelming physics and chemistry of the obese state. 4. The nutritional blueprint, the biochemistry of the DASH diet. If reducing sodium is the defensive strategy of the hypertension war, the DASH diet, dietary approaches to stop hypertension, is the offensive heavy artillery. This is not a diet in the colloquial sense of a temporary restriction for weight loss. It is a meticulously engineered nutritional protocol backed by some of the most rigorous clinical trials in the history of nutritional science. Before the landmark DASH trials of the 1990s, the medical consensus on diet and blood pressure was fragmented and largely focused on what not to eat. The DASH research revolutionized this paradigm by proving that what you do eat is just as potent as any pharmaceutical agent.
The investigation into why this diet works reveals a symphony of mineral interactions, vascular biochemistry, and evolutionary logic that effectively hacks the body's pressure regulation systems. It is a prescription written not in Latin drug names, but in the elemental language of potassium, magnesium, calcium, and fiber. The genius of the DASH protocol lies in its nutrient density and its specific mineral stoichiometry. The modern Western diet is defined by a catastrophic inversion of the natural mineral balance. It is high in sodium and critically low in potassium, magnesium, and calcium. The DASH diet flips this ratio back to its evolutionary baseline. The central protagonist in this nutritional narrative is potassium. In the cellular machinery of the kidneys, potassium acts as the direct antagonist to sodium. Through a mechanism known as the sodium-potassium pump, high intracellular potassium levels force the kidneys to excrete sodium. It is a biological seesaw. When potassium goes up, sodium and the water retention that comes with it goes down. The DASH diet, by emphasizing massive consumption of fruits and vegetables, floods the system with 4,700 milligrams or more of potassium daily. This level of intake effectively unlocks the kidneys, allowing them to flush out the saline fluid that bloats the blood volume. But the biochemical magic extends beyond the kidneys. The diet's emphasis on nuts, seeds, whole grains, and leafy greens provides a rich source of magnesium. Magnesium is nature's calcium channel blocker. In the pharmacology of hypertension, doctors often prescribe drugs that block calcium from entering the muscle cells of the heart and arteries, preventing them from contracting too hard.
Magnesium performs this function naturally. It competes with calcium for binding sites on the smooth muscle cells of the blood vessels, encouraging them to relax and dilate. When magnesium levels are sufficient, the arterial walls loosen their grip, increasing the diameter of the vessel and lowering systemic resistance. Simultaneously, the adequate calcium intake provided by low-fat dairy products in the DASH protocol helps regulate vascular tone and nerve transmission, ensuring the rhythmic constriction and relaxation of the heart remain stable. This trifecta of minerals, potassium, magnesium, calcium, creates a biochemical environment where high blood pressure simply cannot thrive. Deepening the investigation, we uncover the role of dietary nitrates found in high concentrations in the leafy greens and root vegetables, like beets and spinach, mandated by the DASH plan. When we chew these vegetables, commensal bacteria in our mouths convert these nitrates into nitrites. Once swallowed, the stomach acid converts these nitrates into nitric oxide, the same potent gas that the body produces to signal vasodilation. By consuming a diet high in nitrates, we are essentially providing the body with an exogenous supply of this critical signaling molecule. This nitrate-nitrite-nitric oxide pathway is a powerful mechanism for lowering blood pressure, independent of salt reduction. It explains why populations that consume plant-heavy diets exhibit superior vascular flexibility. The DASH diet turns every meal into a dose of vasodilator therapy, keeping the arteries open and pliable through purely nutritional means. Furthermore, the DASH diet is a high-fiber intervention. The importance of fiber extends far beyond digestion. It is the fuel source for the gut microbiome. Emerging research in the gut-heart axis suggests that the trillions of bacteria residing in our colon play a master role in blood pressure regulation. When we feed these bacteria the complex fibers found in whole grains, legumes, and vegetables, they ferment them into short-chain fatty acids, such as acetate, propionate, and butyrate. These SCFAs enter the circulation and interact with specific receptors in the blood vessels and kidneys to lower blood pressure. They also dampen systemic inflammation. The standard American diet, devoid of fiber, starves these beneficial bacteria, leading to a microbiome dysbiosis that promotes inflammation and hypertension.
The DASH diet is essentially a terraforming project for the gut, cultivating a microbial ecosystem that actively protects the host from cardiovascular disease. Implementing the DASH diet, however, represents a radical departure from the norms of industrialized eating. It calls for 4 to 5 servings of vegetables and 4 to 5 servings of fruit every single day. To the average consumer, accustomed to a garnish of lettuce or a side of fries, this volume of plant matter is staggering. It requires a fundamental shift in how one views a plate of food. Meat, traditionally the centerpiece of the Western meal, is relegated to a side dish or a condiment. The bulk of the caloric intake shifts to complex carbohydrates and plant proteins. This transition attacks the root of insulin resistance as well. By eliminating refined sugars and simple starches in favor of complex, slow-burning grains, the DASH diet stabilizes blood sugar levels. This reduction in insulin spikes further reduces sodium retention and sympathetic nervous system activation, creating a synergistic effect with the mineral content of the diet. The cultural and economic barriers to the DASH diet are significant and must be acknowledged in any serious investigation. We live in a food system where fresh produce is expensive and perishable, while sodium-laden processed foods are cheap and shelf-stable. For millions living in food deserts, accessing the potassium-rich components of the DASH diet is a logistical and financial impossibility. This turns the diet into a marker of socioeconomic status. However, for those with access, the data is incontrovertible. Clinical studies have shown that the DASH diet can lower systolic blood pressure by 8 to 14 points, and efficacy that rivals and often surpasses monotherapy with ACE inhibitors or beta blockers. When combined with sodium restriction, the results are even more profound, offering a non-pharmacological route to normotension for millions of prehemorrhagic individuals. Critically, the DASH diet challenges the reductionistic approach of modern supplementation. One cannot simply take a potassium pill, a magnesium tablet, and a fiber supplement and expect the same results. The efficacy of the diet lies in the food matrix, the complex, unreplicable interaction of thousands of phytochemicals, antioxidants, and micronutrients found in whole foods. There are likely compounds in broccoli and berries that we have not yet identified,
which work in concert with minerals to protect the endothelium. The DASH diet forces us to respect the complexity of nature. It posits that the human body was designed to run on a specific fuel mixture, and that hypertension is largely a symptom of using the wrong fuel. In the final analysis, the DASH diet is not a menu, it is a medical intervention. It represents a return to the biochemical conditions under which our cardiovascular system evolved. It replaces the toxic inputs of the industrial food chain, excess sodium, sugar, and saturated fat, with the restorative inputs of the natural world. It utilizes the potassium from the earth, the magnesium from the seed, and the nitrates from the leaf to mechanically and chemically soothe the vascular system. It is a testament to the power of nutrition to reverse pathology. By adhering to the DASH protocol, a patient is not merely eating healthy, they are administering a complex multi-targeted therapy that rebuilds the vascular defenses from the inside out, proving that in the fight against hypertension, the grocery store is as critical as the pharmacy.
5. The toxic elixir, unraveling the alcohol-hypertension connection. To investigate the relationship between alcohol and hypertension is to navigate a labyrinth of cultural mythology, contradictory data, and profound physiological betrayal. For centuries, alcohol has been celebrated as the supreme social lubricant, a relaxant, and, in certain folklore, a tonic for the heart. The image of the centenarian attributing their longevity to a daily shot of whiskey, or the French paradox, which suggested that red wine conferred vascular immunity upon a population that consumed high amounts of saturated fat, has created a dangerous halo effect around ethanol. However, modern epidemiological and pathophysiological research has systematically dismantled this romanticized view. When stripped of its social context and analyzed strictly as a bioactive compound, ethanol reveals itself to be a potent, dose-dependent toxin that wages a multi-front war on the cardiovascular system. The directive to limit alcohol consumption is not a moralistic plea. It is a hemodynamic necessity derived from the undeniable fact that ethanol is a vasopressor disguised as a sedative. The mechanism by which alcohol elevates blood pressure is a complex interplay of neurobiology and endocrinology that begins the moment the substance enters the bloodstream. While the initial sip may induce a subjective feeling of relaxation, the physiological reality is a sharp activation of the sympathetic nervous system, or SNS. Alcohol acts as a pharmacological trigger for the release of catecholamines, specifically adrenaline and noradrenaline. These are the body's fight or flight hormones. In a sober state, these chemicals are reserved for moments of acute stress or physical demand. Alcohol forces their release in a sedentary state, signaling the heart to beat faster and with greater force, increased cardiac output, while simultaneously commanding the peripheral arteries to constrict. This creates a paradoxical state where the mind may feel sedated, but the cardiovascular system is sprinting. The drinker is effectively revving the engine while the car is in neutral, placing immense mechanical strain on the arterial walls. Further complicating this picture is the impact of alcohol on the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system, the body's master regulator of fluid balance and blood pressure. Chronic alcohol consumption disrupts the delicate feedback loops of the kidneys. It stimulates the release of renin, an enzyme that catalyzes the production of angiotensin II, the potent vasoconstrictor previously discussed in the context of obesity. Simultaneously, alcohol inhibits the production of vasopressin, antidiuretic hormone, in the short term, leading to the frequent urination associated with drinking, but triggers a rebound effect of fluid retention and electrolyte imbalance in the long term. This disruption leads to a depletion of magnesium and calcium, minerals essential for the relaxation of vascular smooth muscle. Without these electrolytes, the arteries lose their ability to dilate, locking into a constricted state that drives pressure upward. We must also scrutinize the J-curve hypothesis, a statistical model that for years suggested that light drinkers had lower cardiovascular mortality than abstainers. This data is now undergoing a rigorous reevaluation. Advanced analysis suggests that the abstainer groups in these historical studies were often contaminated with sick quitters, individuals who had stopped drinking because of pre-existing health conditions, including alcoholism. When these confounding variables are removed, the protective benefit of low-dose alcohol largely evaporates, revealing a linear risk model. The more you drink, the higher your blood pressure goes. The World Health Organization has recently shifted its stance to declare that no level of alcohol consumption is entirely safe for health. While a single glass of wine may not cause an immediate hypertensive crisis in a healthy person, the cumulative effect of daily consumption creates a new normal for the vascular system, resetting the body's baroreceptors to tolerate higher baseline pressures.
The interaction between alcohol and antihypertensive medication constitutes a critical, often overlooked subchapter of this investigation. The liver, the body's primary detoxification plant, is responsible for metabolizing both ethanol and the majority of blood pressure medications. When alcohol is present, the liver prioritizes its metabolism because it perceives ethanol as a poison. This creates a metabolic bottleneck. If a patient takes their medication while drinking, the drug may either be metabolized too quickly, rendering it ineffective, or too slowly, leading to dangerous toxicity. Furthermore, alcohol actively antagonizes the effects of drugs like beta blockers and ACE inhibitors, while the medication attempts to relax the vessels.
The alcohol-induced adrenaline surge attempts to constrict them. This pharmacological tug-of-war renders the treatment regimen unstable, leading to resistant hypertension, a condition where pressure remains high despite the use of 3 or more medications. The cultural phenomenon of holiday heart syndrome provides a stark clinical window into the acute effects of alcohol. Emergency rooms see a significant spike in cardiac admissions following weekends and holidays. These are often healthy individuals with no history of heart disease who present with atrial fibrillation, an irregular rapid heart rate, and hypertensive urgency following a binge drinking episode. This condition demonstrates that alcohol's toxicity is not merely cumulative over decades, but can precipitate acute electrical and mechanical failure in the heart within hours. The ethanol molecule disrupts the electrolyte channels in the heart cells, causing chaotic electrical signaling. For a patient with pre-existing hypertension, a binge episode is akin to throwing gasoline on a smoldering fire, capable of pushing stable blood pressure into stroke range levels. We must also address the caloric and metabolic cost of alcohol, linking back to the issue of weight management. Alcohol is energy-dense, providing 7 calories per gram, almost as much as pure fat, with 0 nutritional value. These empty calories are preferentially stored as visceral fat, the very tissue that drives metabolic hypertension. Moreover, alcohol consumption lowers inhibition and alters glucose metabolism, often leading to poor dietary choices and late-night eating. The beer belly is not just a cosmetic issue, it is a visible manifestation of alcohol-induced metabolic syndrome. The liver, overwhelmed by processing alcohol, accumulates fat, hepatic steatosis, which drives systemic inflammation and insulin resistance, further exacerbating the hypertensive state. The societal shift required to limit alcohol consumption is perhaps even more challenging than dietary changes, given how deeply ethanol is woven into the fabric of celebration, commiseration, and relaxation in Western culture. However, the rise of the sober curious movement and the explosion of the non-alcoholic beverage market suggest a turning point. People are beginning to prioritize health span, the number of healthy years lived, over the temporary euphoria and intoxication. For the hypertensive patient,
The guidelines are strict. Men should limit intake to no more than 2 drinks per day and women to 1. However, for those struggling to control their numbers, total abstinence is the gold standard. Clinical trials show that when heavy drinkers stop, their systolic blood pressure can drop by 5 to 10 millimeters per mercury within weeks, a recovery of vascular function that is nothing short of miraculous. Ultimately, alcohol acts as a saboteur in the body of the hypertensive patient. It creates chemical chaos, disrupts sleep architecture, preventing the nocturnal dipping of blood pressure that is crucial for cardiovascular recovery, and undermines the efficacy of medication. It is a wolf in sheep's clothing, marketed as relaxation while inducing physiological stress. To limit alcohol is to remove a constant low-grade chemical irritant from the vascular endothelium. It allows the liver to focus on regulating cholesterol and glucose, the kidneys to balance fluids correctly, and the nervous system to return to a state of true rather than chemically induced calm. In the high-stakes management of hypertension, sobriety is a potent therapeutic agent.
6. The vascular scorched earth, the imperative to stop smoking immediately. If sodium is a burden and alcohol is a saboteur, tobacco smoke is an act of chemical warfare against the human cardiovascular system. There is no other substance in voluntary human use that destroys the architecture of blood vessels with such devastating efficiency. The entry, "Stop smoking immediately," is not a suggestion. It is the single most critical intervention in the preservation of life for a hypertensive patient. To understand why, one must look beyond the lungs and into the microscopic devastation occurring within the arteries. Cigarette smoke contains over 7,000 chemicals, including hundreds of known toxins, but the synergy between nicotine and carbon monoxide creates a specific dual-action mechanism of destruction that accelerates hypertension into heart failure and stroke with terrifying speed. The assault begins with nicotine. Often dismissed as merely the addictive component, nicotine is a powerful sympathomimetic drug. Within seconds of inhalation, it crosses the blood-brain barrier and triggers a massive discharge of adrenaline and norepinephrine. This is not a subtle shift, it is a violent kick to the autonomic nervous system. The heart rate spikes, forcing the cardiac muscle to demand more oxygen. Simultaneously, the peripheral arteries clamp down in a severe spasm of vasoconstriction. This acute effect causes an immediate, dramatic rise in blood pressure that can last for up to 30 minutes after a single cigarette. For a pack-a-day smoker, this means the cardiovascular system is in a state of chemically induced hypertensive crisis for nearly the entire waking day. The heart is forced to pump against a wall of resistance hour after hour, year after year. However, the second prong of the attack, carbon monoxide, ensures that the heart must work even harder while receiving less fuel. Carbon monoxide has a binding affinity for hemoglobin that is 200 times stronger than oxygen. When smoke is inhaled, CO hijacks the red blood cells, displacing oxygen and forming carboxyhemoglobin. This results in a state of functional anemia. The blood is circulating, but it is carrying a suffocating load of exhaust gas instead of life-giving oxygen. The heart, sensing this lack of oxygen in the tissues, attempts to compensate by beating harder and faster. It is a tragic physiological irony. Nicotine clamps the arteries shut and revs the heart rate,
while carbon monoxide starves the heart muscle of the oxygen it needs to sustain that workload. This mismatch between oxygen supply and demand is the fundamental driver of angina and ischemic heart disease in smokers. The long-term damage, however, is structural and often irreversible. The chemicals in tobacco smoke, including formaldehyde, benzene, and arsenic, are directly cytotoxic to the endothelium, the single layer of cells lining the blood vessels. A healthy endothelium is like a non-stick pan. It is smooth and produces nitric oxide to keep vessels dilated. Smoking scours this lining, turning it into something resembling Velcro. It creates microscopic lesions and inflammation sites. The body attempts to repair these lesions by patching them with cholesterol and other lipids. This is the genesis of atherosclerosis. In smokers, this plaque formation is accelerated and unstable. The chemicals in smoke make the blood platelets sticky, increasing the likelihood that they will clump together on these plaques. This trifecta, damaged vessel walls, plaque buildup, and sticky blood, turns the hypertensive patient into a walking time bomb for thrombotic events. A clot forms, travels to a narrowed vessel in the brain or heart, and the result is a catastrophic stroke or myocardial infarction. The investigation must also address the modern evolution of nicotine delivery, the electronic cigarette, or vape. Marketed as a safer alternative, vaping has introduced a new generation to nicotine-induced hypertension. While e-cigarettes eliminate the combustion products like tar and carbon monoxide, they do not eliminate the vascular violence of nicotine. In fact, many modern pod systems use nicotine salts, which allow for the delivery of massive concentrations of nicotine into the bloodstream without the harsh throat hit of combustible tobacco. This results in the same acute spikes in blood pressure and arterial stiffness seen in traditional smoking. Furthermore, the aerosolized flavorings and solvents, propylene glycol and vegetable glycerin, break down into aldehydes when heated, which have been shown to induce endothelial dysfunction. The verdict is becoming clear. While vaping may spare the lungs some of the damage of tar, it does not spare the blood vessels the stress of vasoconstriction. For the hypertensive patient, harm reduction is a dangerous illusion. The only safe vascular state is nicotine-free.
The concept of secondhand smoke extends the radius of this toxicity. The non-smoker living with a smoker is subjected to side stream smoke, which is chemically distinct and, in some metrics, more toxic than mainstream smoke because it burns at a lower temperature, producing higher concentrations of certain carcinogens. Research has confirmed that chronic exposure to secondhand smoke increases the risk of developing hypertension and heart disease by 25 to 30%. This elevates smoking from a personal health choice to a public health hazard. The third-hand smoke, the residue of toxins that settles on furniture, clothes, and walls, continues to off-gas and can be absorbed through the skin, posing a risk particularly to children and pets, perpetuating the cycle of vascular injury. The timeline of recovery after quitting is one of the most hopeful narratives in medical science, demonstrating the body's extraordinary capacity for repair. Within 20 minutes of the last cigarette, the heart rate and blood pressure drop. Within 12 hours, the carbon monoxide levels in the blood normalize, and the oxygen carrying capacity returns to 100%. Within weeks, the endothelial cells begin to regenerate, and the production of nitric oxide resumes, allowing the arteries to relax naturally. The risk of heart attack begins to plummet. For the hypertensive patient, quitting smoking is the equivalent of adding the most powerful medication available to their regimen without any side effects other than the temporary discomfort of withdrawal. However, the psychology of addiction makes this immediate cessation a monumental struggle. Nicotine rewires the dopamine reward pathways in the brain, creating a dependency that rivals heroin in its tenacity. The act of smoking often becomes a coping mechanism for stress, the very stress that contributes to hypertension. Breaking this cycle requires a comprehensive strategy that addresses both the chemical dependency and the behavioral triggers. This may involve nicotine replacement therapy, patches or gums, to wean the body off the substance without the toxins of smoke, prescription medications to block cravings, and cognitive behavioral therapy to relearn stress management. The cultural history of smoking is a testament to the power of marketing over science. For decades, the tobacco industry obfuscated the link between smoking and vascular disease,
using imagery of rugged individualism, the Marlboro Man, or sophistication to sell a product that inevitably leads to disability and death. Today, the stigma has shifted. We now understand that every puff is a microscopic injury, a deliberate scarring of the lifeline that feeds the brain and heart. The smoker's paradox, where smokers sometimes appear to have better outcomes after heart attacks, has been debunked as a statistical artifact. Smokers just have heart attacks so much younger than non-smokers that they have fewer age-related comorbidities. The reality is stark. Smoking accelerates vascular aging by decades. In the final analysis, stopping smoking is the non-negotiable prerequisite for hypertension control. No amount of kale, jogging, or medication can fully counteract the daily poisoning of the endothelium caused by tobacco. It is the act of removing the tourniquet from the body's blood supply. By quitting, the patient stops the active erosion of their arteries, halts the progression of plaque, and gives the heart a fighting chance to pump freely again. It is the single most profound act of self-preservation available to the modern human.
7. The invisible adversary, neuroendocrine warfare and stress management. To label stress merely as an emotional state is to fundamentally misunderstand human biology. In the context of hypertension, stress is a quantifiable physiological toxicity that erodes the cardiovascular infrastructure with the precision of a chemical weapon. The directive to manage stress effectively is not a soft lifestyle suggestion found in the back pages of a wellness magazine. It is a critical medical intervention aimed at dismantling the body's most primal survival mechanism, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. This system, evolved over millions of years to propel our ancestors away from predators on the prehistoric savanna, is now maladapted to the chronic, low-grade anxieties of modern existence. We are living in a state of evolutionary mismatch, where the tiger is no longer a physical beast, but an endless stream of emails, financial pressures, and digital overstimulation. The body, however, cannot distinguish between a predator and a deadline. It responds to both with the same devastating cocktail of vasoconstrictive hormones. The investigation into stress-induced hypertension begins with the anatomy of the fight-or-flight response. When the brain perceives a threat, the amygdala sounds the alarm, signaling the hypothalamus to activate the sympathetic nervous system. This is the biological accelerator. It triggers the adrenal glands to flood the bloodstream with adrenaline, epinephrine, and cortisol. Adrenaline is the immediate actor. It docks with beta receptors on the heart, forcing it to beat faster and harder, increasing cardiac output. Simultaneously, it binds to alpha receptors on the arteries, commanding the smooth muscles to contract. This sudden narrowing of the vascular pipes, combined with the increased volume being pumped by the heart, causes a radical spike in blood pressure. This is a functional adaptation for short-term survival, channeling blood to the muscles for escape, but when triggered chronically, it becomes a mechanism of destruction. The role of cortisol, the primary stress hormone, is even more insidious in its long-term effects. Unlike adrenaline, which degrades relatively quickly, cortisol can remain elevated for extended periods in a chronically stressed individual. High cortisol levels suppress the body's ability to produce nitric oxide, the gas required for arterial relaxation. Furthermore,
cortisol increases the sensitivity of the blood vessels to adrenaline, meaning that a stressed person reacts more violently to minor stimuli than a calm person. It is a compounding effect. Cortisol also disrupts the renal handling of sodium, signaling the kidneys to retain salt and water, thereby increasing blood volume and pressure. It is a perfect storm. The vessels are tighter, the heart is pumping harder, and the fluid volume is higher. Over years, this allostatic load causes the arterial walls to thicken and stiffen, arteriosclerosis, to protect themselves from the constant battering, permanently resetting the baseline blood pressure to a pathological level. The antidote to this sympathetic overdrive lies in the activation of its biological counterweight, the parasympathetic nervous system, specifically the vagus nerve. This is the brake pedal of the human body. The vagus nerve wanders from the brainstem down through the neck, innervating the heart, lungs, and digestive tract. Stimulating this nerve releases acetylcholine, a neurotransmitter that slows the heart rate and relaxes blood vessels. The most direct mechanical way to hack this system is through controlled respiration. Deep diaphragmatic breathing, specifically techniques where the exhalation is longer than the inhalation, physically stimulates the vagus nerve. When the diaphragm descends fully, it creates a pressure differential in the thoracic cavity that signals the brain that the threat has passed. This is not esoteric mysticism, it is respiratory physiology. Clinical studies confirm that slow breathing, around 6 breaths per minute, can synchronize heart rate variability and induce acute vasodilation, dropping blood pressure significantly within minutes. Meditation and mindfulness practices represent the cognitive restructuring required to dampen the HPA axis trigger. Neuroimaging studies using fMRI have shown that long-term meditators possess a less reactive amygdala and a thicker prefrontal cortex, the area of the brain responsible for executive control and emotional regulation. By practicing mindfulness, a patient is essentially training their brain to decouple the stimulus, the traffic jam, the rude comment, from the reaction, the adrenaline dump. This neuroplasticity allows the hypertensive patient to navigate the world without constantly triggering the vascular constriction associated with stress.
It is a form of mental insulation that protects the heart from the psychological environment. The relaxation response, a term coined by Dr. Herbert Benson at Harvard Medical School, describes the measurable physiological state of deep rest that alters the physical and genetic expression of the body, downregulating the genes associated with inflammation and oxidative stress. We must also conduct a forensic analysis of sleep, the ultimate stress management tool. Sleep is not merely the absence of wakefulness, it is an active metabolic maintenance cycle.
In a healthy individual, blood pressure follows a circadian rhythm, dropping by 10 to 20% during deep sleep, a phenomenon known as dipping. This nocturnal dip provides a critical recovery period for the cardiovascular system, a time when the mechanical load on the heart and arteries is relieved. Chronic stress and anxiety often destroy sleep architecture, leading to non-dipping hypertension, where pressure remains high throughout the night. This is a grave prognostic indicator, strongly correlated with stroke and kidney failure. During deep, slow-wave sleep, the brain's glymphatic system also flushes out metabolic waste products. Without adequate sleep, the sympathetic nervous system remains stuck in the on position 24/7. Prioritizing sleep hygiene, darkness, coolness, and the removal of blue light-emitting screens is a non-negotiable medical intervention for pressure control. The cultural context of stress management cannot be ignored. We live in a society that fetishizes the grind, often wearing sleep deprivation and high stress as badges of honor or indicators of productivity. This cultural conditioning makes the prescription to relax feel counterintuitive or even lazy to the high-achieving patient. However, the data reveals that the type A personality, characterized by hostility, urgency, and competitiveness, is a direct vector for cardiovascular disease. The hostility component in particular is toxic. The chronic anger and cynicism associated with this personality type keep the body in a state of perpetual vigilance. Treatment, therefore, often requires a philosophical reorientation, a cognitive shift from seeing the world as a battleground to seeing it as a navigable ecosystem. It involves setting boundaries, delegating tasks, and recognizing that preserving one's vascular integrity is the prerequisite for any long-term achievement. Looking toward the future,
technology is beginning to bridge the gap between subjective feelings of stress and objective physiological data. Biofeedback devices and wearable technology now allow patients to monitor their heart rate variability, HRV, a key metric of autonomic nervous system balance, in real time. This creates a feedback loop where a patient can see the immediate vascular impact of a breathing exercise or a meditation session, gamifying the reduction of stress. As we move forward, the integration of mental health support into cardiology will become seamless. We are moving toward a holistic role where a cardiologist is just as likely to prescribe a course of cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, or a subscription to a meditation app as they are a beta blocker. In the final analysis, managing stress is the act of silencing the internal noise that deafens the body's regulatory systems. It is about reclaiming ownership of the autonomic nervous system. By mastering the breath, prioritizing the restoration of sleep, and restructuring the cognitive reaction to the environment, the patient removes the primary fuel source of neurogenic hypertension. It is a discipline of inner engineering that transforms the body from a reactive vessel of tension into a fortress of calm, ensuring that the blood flows through the arteries like a steady river rather than a raging torrent.
8. The chemical shield, the absolute necessity of medication adherence. If lifestyle changes are the foundation of hypertension treatment, medication is the structural reinforcement that prevents the building from collapsing under its own weight. Entry number 8, adhere to medication regimen, sounds deceptively simple, a matter of routine compliance. In reality, it is the single most significant failure point in modern cardiology. The phenomenon of non-adherence is so pervasive that the World Health Organization has estimated that approximately 50% of patients with chronic diseases do not take their medications as prescribed. In the context of hypertension, this statistic is a death sentence. The drugs designed to lower blood pressure, diuretics, ACE inhibitors, beta blockers, and calcium channel blockers, are miracles of modern chemistry, capable of extending life by decades. Yet their efficacy is entirely dependent on a strict, unwavering temporal discipline. To understand why exactly on time and never skipping are life and death directives, we must delve into the pharmacokinetics of these agents and the unforgiving physics of the rebound effect. The mechanism of antihypertensive therapy is based on the concept of steady state. When a patient takes a daily dose of medication, the goal is to maintain a constant therapeutic level of the drug in the bloodstream. Every drug has a half-life, the time it takes for the concentration of the drug in the body to reduce by half. Most modern blood pressure medications are formulated to have a duration of action that covers a 24-hour window. However, as the 24-hour mark approaches, the drug levels drop to their trough concentration. If the next dose is delayed or skipped, the drug level falls below the therapeutic threshold. The protection evaporates. The biological pathways that the drug was blocking, whether it was the constriction of vessels or the retention of sodium, roar back to life. This is not merely a return to baseline, it is often a rebound, where the body, having fought against the drug suppression, overcompensates with a massive surge in pressure. This volatility is the true enemy. The vascular system can often tolerate a stable, slightly elevated pressure better than it can tolerate wild fluctuations. Variability in blood pressure is an independent risk factor for stroke. When a patient skips doses, they subject their arteries to a mechanical whipsaw effect.
Imagine a balloon being rapidly inflated and deflated. The structural integrity of the rubber weakens far faster than if it were kept at a constant inflation. In the brain, these fluctuations are catastrophic. The delicate cerebral microvessels, which lack the robust muscular layers of larger arteries, are particularly susceptible to shear stress. A sudden spike in pressure following a missed dose can rupture a weakened vessel or dislodge a plaque, leading to a hemorrhagic or ischemic stroke. The data is chilling. The risk of stroke in hypertensive patients is highest in the days immediately following the cessation of medication. We must investigate the arsenal itself to appreciate the precision of these chemical interventions. Diuretics, the oldest class, act on the molecular pumps in the kidney's nephrons, forcing the excretion of sodium in water to reduce blood volume. They are the plumbers of the system. ACE inhibitors, angiotensin-converting enzyme inhibitors, and ARBs, angiotensin II receptor blockers, are the chemical snipers. They target the specific enzymatic pathway that causes vessels to constrict, effectively jamming the body's signal to raise pressure. Calcium channel blockers work at the cellular level of the arterial muscle, physically blocking the calcium ions required for contraction, forcing the vessel to relax. Beta blockers act as a governor on the heart's engine, blocking the effects of adrenaline. Often, these drugs are used in combination, attacking the hypertension from multiple angles: volume, hormonal signaling, and mechanical tone. To disrupt this symphony by skipping a dose is to leave a flank exposed to the enemy. The psychology of non-adherence is a complex tapestry of denial, misinformation, and human fallibility. Hypertension is famously known as the silent killer because it is largely asymptomatic. A patient with a blood pressure of 180/110 might feel perfectly fine. This lack of feedback loop creates a dangerous cognitive dissonance. Why take a pill that costs money and might have side effects like fatigue, cough, or frequent urination to treat a condition that feels like nothing? This is the prevention paradox. The patient is being asked to invest in a future abstract benefit, avoiding a stroke in 10 years, at the cost of present convenience. Furthermore, the medicalization of daily life can be psychologically burdensome. Taking a pill every morning is a daily reminder of mortality and sickness.
A status many wish to deny. The consequences of this denial are visible in the neurology wards and dialysis clinics of every major hospital. Uncontrolled hypertension is the leading cause of kidney failure, requiring grueling dialysis 3 times a week. It is a primary driver of vascular dementia, as the high pressure slowly destroys the white matter of the brain, leading to cognitive decline that mimics Alzheimer's. Adherence to medication is the only shield against these outcomes. It preserves the end organ function. A patient who adheres to their regimen is not just lowering a number on a cuff. They are preserving the filtration capacity of their kidneys, the elasticity of their aorta, and the cognitive sharpness of their mind. The medication is a preservative agent for the body's vital tissues. Technological and pharmaceutical advancements are attempting to engineer adherence into the system. The rise of the polypill, a single tablet combining 2 or 3 different classes of antihypertensives plus a statin, has revolutionized treatment by simplifying the regimen. Taking 1 pill is exponentially easier than taking 4. Smart pill bottles that track opening times and send reminders to smartphones are closing the loop on forgetfulness. In the near future, we may see the widespread adoption of long-acting injectable antihypertensives, similar to those developed for HIV or cholesterol, where a single injection could control blood pressure for months, removing the burden of daily compliance entirely. This would be a paradigm shift, effectively vaccinating patients against high blood pressure for set periods. However, until such technology is ubiquitous, the responsibility lies in the doctor-patient contract. Adherence requires a partnership. It necessitates open communication about side effects. If a diuretic causes inconvenient urination or a beta blocker causes lethargy, the regimen can be adjusted. There are dozens of molecules available. Finding the Cinderella slipper, the perfect drug with 0 side effects for a specific biology, is almost always possible with patients. The danger lies in the patient silently stopping the drug rather than voicing the complaint. Ultimately, adhering to a medication regimen is an act of supreme rationality. It is the acknowledgement that biology is chemistry, and that when the body's internal chemistry fails to regulate pressure, external chemistry must bridge the gap. It is a daily ritual of survival.
A small, deliberate action that holds the chaotic forces of fluid dynamics at bay. To take the pill exactly on time, every time, is to impose order on entropy. It is the chemical lock on the door, ensuring that the silent assassin remains outside, preserving the sanctity of the vessel and the longevity of the life within.
9. The domestic surveillance, the revolution of home monitoring. To rely solely on the blood pressure readings taken in a clinician's office is to navigate a complex, storm-tossed ocean using a map drawn from a single glimpse of the horizon once every 6 months. It is an antiquated methodology that fails to capture the dynamic, fluctuating reality of human hemodynamics. Blood pressure is not a static number, fixed like a height or a shoe size. It is a rhythmic, living metric that oscillates with every heartbeat, every thought, every meal, and every shift in posture. It rises with the morning sun and falls with the onset of sleep. It spikes during a heated argument and dips during a moment of reverie. Therefore, the directive to monitor blood pressure at home is not merely a suggestion for data collection. It is a fundamental shift in the paradigm of care, moving from a paternalistic snapshot model of medicine to a participatory, continuous surveillance model that empowers the patient with the ultimate weapon against pathology, the truth.
The necessity of home monitoring is underscored by two pervasive clinical phenomena that render office readings notoriously unreliable: white coat hypertension and masked hypertension. The former describes a conditioned physiological response where the mere presence of a medical professional, the white coat, triggers an anxiety-induced spike in blood pressure. The clinical environment, with its sterile smell, bright lights, and the inherent power dynamic between doctor and patient, acts as a stressor. The amygdala activates, the sympathetic nervous system fires, and a patient who is normotensive at home suddenly registers as hypertensive in the exam room. This leads to overtreatment, where patients are prescribed powerful drugs they do not need, leading to hypotension, dizziness, and fainting in their daily lives. Conversely, and perhaps more dangerously, is masked hypertension. These patients exhibit normal pressure in the calm of the clinic, but suffer from dangerous spikes in the chaos of their real lives, during stressful commutes, high-pressure meetings, or domestic conflicts. Without home monitoring, these individuals are invisible to the medical system, walking toward a stroke with a clean bill of health in their pockets. Home monitoring strips away these artifacts, revealing the patient's true hemodynamic load. To execute this protocol effectively, one must understand the technology and the
For a home monitor is a scientific instrument that demands precision. The modern home device typically uses the oscillometric method. Unlike the traditional mercury sphygmomanometer used by doctors, which relies on listening for Korotkoff sounds, the sound of blood rushing through the artery, digital monitors detect the vibrations of the blood flowing against the arterial wall inside the cuff. A microprocessor analyzes these oscillation waves to calculate the systolic and diastolic pressures. This technology is a marvel of engineering, but it is sensitive to error. The size of the cuff is critical. A cuff that is too small acts as a tourniquet, artificially inflating the reading, while a cuff that is too large dissipates the pressure, leading to a false low. The sensor must be aligned directly over the brachial artery. The arm must be supported at heart level. If the arm hangs by the side, the hydrostatic pressure of the column of blood adds gravity to the reading, skewing the numbers. Even the posture of the body matters. Crossing the legs creates a muscular tension that compresses the veins in the pelvis, increasing intrathoracic pressure and raising the reading by as much as 8 to 10 millimeters mercury. Thus, home monitoring is a ritual of stillness. It requires the patient to sit quietly for 5 minutes, back supported, feet flat on the floor, in a state of deliberate calm before engaging the machine. The data harvested from this ritual offers insights that a sporadic clinic visit never could. Of particular interest to the investigative cardiologist is the morning surge. In a healthy circadian rhythm, blood pressure dips to its lowest point during deep sleep and begins to rise just before awakening, driven by the body's natural cortisol alarm clock. However, in hypertensive patients, this morning rise can be excessive and violent. This exaggerated surge is a statistical kill zone. It correlates perfectly with the epidemiological fact that heart attacks and strokes are most likely to occur between 6 a.m. and noon. By monitoring immediately upon waking, before coffee or medication, a patient can detect this specific vulnerability. If the morning numbers are consistently high despite normal readings later in the day, it indicates a need to adjust the timing of medication, perhaps taking a long-acting chronotherapeutic agent at night to blunt the dawn spike. This level of granular management is impossible without the data provided by the patient. Furthermore,
the psychological impact of self-monitoring creates a powerful biofeedback loop. When a patient sees the direct correlation between a high-salt dinner and a high morning reading, the abstract warnings about sodium become concrete reality. When they see their numbers drop after a brisk walk or a session of deep breathing, the reinforcement is immediate and positive. This transforms the patient from a passive recipient of care into an active scientist of their own physiology. The logbook, whether a physical journal or a digital app, becomes a dossier of cause and effect. It allows the physician to treat the patient based on averages rather than outliers. The most clinically significant metric is often the weekly average of morning and evening readings. This smoothed-out data set eliminates the noise of daily variability and provides a clear trajectory of disease progression or regression. The future of this entry lies in the rapid evolution of connected health technology. We are moving beyond the inflatable cuff. Emerging technologies are utilizing optical sensors, photoplethysmography, similar to those in smartwatches, but calibrated to estimate blood pressure by measuring pulse wave velocity, the speed at which the pressure wave travels from the heart to the wrist. While currently less accurate than the cuff, the algorithms are improving exponentially. We are approaching an era of cuffless continuous monitoring, where a wearable device tracks blood pressure 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, identifying triggers and patterns invisible to intermittent checks. Artificial intelligence will soon analyze this stream of data, predicting hypertensive crises before they happen and alerting the patient to take immediate action. This is the dawn of remote patient monitoring, where the data from the home flows directly into the electronic health record of the cardiologist, allowing for real-time adjustments to therapy without a physical appointment.
However, a caveat must be issued regarding the psychology of surveillance. For some, the directive to monitor can morph into a source of neurosis. Hypertension obsession is a documented phenomenon where patients check their pressure dozens of times a day, panicking at every minor fluctuation. This anxiety itself drives the pressure up, creating a self-fulfilling prophecy of panic and spikes. It is crucial to understand that blood pressure is supposed to fluctuate. It is a dynamic adaptation to the needs of the moment.
The goal of monitoring is to observe the trend, not to micromanage every beat. The instruction is to measure at fixed times, usually morning and evening, and then to put the machine away, living life in the interim. In the final analysis, monitoring blood pressure at home is the democratization of medical diagnostics. It strips the mystery from the condition. It serves as an early warning system, a motivational tool, and a navigational chart for treatment. By keeping a detailed log, the patient provides the physician with the high-resolution data necessary to fine-tune the chemical and behavioral interventions that save lives. It turns the home into a clinical outpost, ensuring that the silent killer is never allowed to operate in the shadows, unobserved and unopposed. 10. The elemental counterweight, the imperative of potassium. If sodium is the villain in the narrative of hypertension, potassium is the unsung hero, the elemental counterbalance that has been tragically exiled from the modern diet. To understand the profound importance of increasing potassium intake, one must descend to the submicroscopic machinery of the cell, specifically to a protein complex known as the sodium-potassium pump, NAK+ ATPase. This pump is one of the most vital engines of life. It is estimated that up to 40% of the body's total resting energy expenditure is dedicated solely to keeping these pumps running. Their job is to maintain a precise electrochemical gradient. They actively pump sodium out of the cell and pump potassium into the cell. This exchange creates the electrical voltage across the cell membrane that allows nerves to fire, muscles to contract, and the heart to beat. In the context of blood pressure, potassium is the biological antagonist to sodium. It is the yin to sodium's yang. When potassium levels are high, the body is signaled to excrete sodium. When potassium is low, the body hoards sodium and with it the fluid that drives hypertension. The evolutionary context of this mineral relationship is startling. Anthropological nutritional analysis suggests that our Paleolithic ancestors consumed a diet that was radically different from our own. They foraged on roots, tubers, fruits, and leaves, consuming nearly 10,500 milligrams of potassium per day, while their sodium intake was less than 1,000 milligrams. Our kidneys evolved in this high potassium, low sodium environment. They were designed to aggressively conserve scarce sodium and easily excrete abundant potassium. The modern industrial diet has inverted this ratio with catastrophic precision. Today, the average American consumes 3,400 milligrams of sodium and only 2,500 milligrams of potassium. We are running Stone Age biology on a space-age fuel mixture that is chemically inverted. This evolutionary discordance is a primary driver of the global hypertension epidemic. The body, panicked by the lack of potassium and the deluge of sodium, goes into a retention mode that stiffens the arteries and expands blood volume. Mechanistically, potassium lowers blood pressure through two distinct pathways. First, it acts directly on the kidney's tubules. High intracellular potassium inhibits the reabsorption of sodium, effectively acting as a natural diuretic.
It forces the kidneys to flush out the excess salt and water, reducing the plasma volume. Second, potassium has a direct vasodilatory effect on the smooth muscle cells of the arteries. It hyperpolarizes the endothelial cells, making them less responsive to the vasoconstrictive signals of adrenaline and angiotensin. This causes the vessel walls to relax and widen, reducing systemic vascular resistance. Clinical meta-analyses have shown that increasing potassium intake can lower systolic blood pressure by an average of 4 to 5 mm mercury in normotensive individuals and up to 8 mm mercury in hypertensive patients, an effect size comparable to a low-dose medication. However, the cultural shorthand for potassium, eat a banana, is a nutritional fallacy that requires correction. While bananas do contain potassium, about 420 milligrams, they are far from the most efficient source and come with a significant sugar load. To reach the recommended daily intake of 4,700 milligrams, one would need to eat nearly 11 bananas a day, a metabolic disaster. The true heavyweights of the potassium world are often overlooked. A medium-baked potato with skin contains nearly 900 milligrams, double that of a banana. Spinach, Swiss chard, and beet greens are nutritional powerhouses. A cup of cooked spinach provides over 800 milligrams. White beans, avocados, and salmon are also superior sources. The increase mandated by this entry requires a deliberate, aggressive culinary strategy. It means centering meals around tubers and greens, moving plant matter from the side of the plate to the center. It involves understanding that boiling vegetables leaches the potassium into the water. To preserve the mineral, one must steam, roast, or consume the pot liquor, the broth.
The investigation must also address the dangerous allure of supplementation. Unlike vitamins or magnesium, where high-dose pills are common, potassium supplements sold over the counter in the United States are legally capped at 99 milligrams, a measly 2% of the daily requirement. This restriction exists for a grim reason. Concentrated potassium salts can be lethal. Potassium chloride is in fact the agent used to stop the heart in lethal injection protocols. A sudden, massive influx of potassium from a pill can disrupt the heart's electrical rhythm, causing cardiac arrest. The body is designed to absorb potassium slowly, buffered by the fiber and water of whole foods.
The food matrix ensures that the mineral enters the bloodstream at a rate the kidneys can handle. Therefore, the prescription is strictly dietary. One cannot pill their way out of a potassium deficit. There is, however, a critical life or death exception to this rule, explicitly noted in the entry, unless kidney function is compromised. This caveat cannot be overemphasized. For patients with chronic kidney disease, CKD, or those taking certain medications like ACE inhibitors or potassium-sparing diuretics, the kidneys lose the ability to excrete excess potassium. In these individuals, eating a high-potassium diet can lead to hyperkalemia, a silent, deadly condition where potassium builds up in the blood. Hyperkalemia has no symptoms until it is too late. It can stop the heart instantly. This creates a terrifying tightrope walk for the hypertensive patient with renal issues. They need to lower their pressure to save their kidneys, but the very mineral that lowers pressure could kill them if their kidneys are already too damaged. This paradox underscores the absolute necessity of blood work. Before embarking on a high-potassium regimen, a patient must know their glomerular filtration rate, GFR, and serum potassium levels. It is a nutritional intervention that requires medical clearance. The broader agricultural and environmental implications of potassium intake are also concerning. Modern intensive farming practices have led to soil depletion, meaning that the vegetables of today may contain less potassium than those of 50 years ago. Furthermore, the ubiquity of refined grains, white flour, white rice, removes the potassium-rich bran and germ. We have engineered a food system that strips away the very element that protects our heart. The fortification of foods adds iron and B vitamins, but rarely potassium. This systemic failure places the burden entirely on the consumer to seek out whole, unrefined, earth-grown foods. Looking to the future, salt substitutes are emerging as a powerful public health tool. These products replace a portion of the sodium chloride in table salt with potassium chloride. Large-scale studies, such as the Salt Substitute and Stroke Study, SSS in China, have demonstrated that replacing regular salt with a low-sodium, high-potassium alternative significantly reduces the risk of stroke and death. This stealth health intervention could revolutionize population-level blood pressure control,
effectively slipping the antidote into the poison. In conclusion, increasing potassium intake is a return to our biological origins. It is an act of realigning our modern chemistry with our ancient genetic programming. By flooding the body with this vital electrolyte through a diet rich in potatoes, greens, and beans, we unlock the kidney's ability to shed salt and relax the arterial tree. It is a powerful natural therapy that works in concert with sodium reduction to depressurize the cardiovascular system. But it is a strategy that demands respect for the potency of the mineral. It must be pursued through the produce aisle, not the supplement bottle, and always with a watchful eye on the renal gatekeepers that regulate our internal C.